Well, it's my pleasure to sit down today with a dear friend, Regan Gallo Fens. Hello, dear.
Hello.
Hey, so we are going to talk briefly about the anniversary of September 11th. This is something that I have been wanting to do for a while because I know that there is a whole generation of young people coming up behind me who didn't experience what transpired in our nation on that day when we were attacked by terrorists. And so Regan is professionally working in the field of journalism, broadcast journalism, and I just thought she would be a great person to be able to pose some thoughtful questions and have a really meaningful conversation about what transpired that day in our country's history. Because for me, it's also a pageant story. And so I just wanted to talk with Regan, also a former Miss Washington, and be able to share this conversation with her and also with those of you who may be interested. Thanks, Regan.
Yeah. Hi, Breann. So this is such a serious topic, and I want to be able um, for you to really express all those emotions of what happened and now looking back. And so first, I want to get the landscape kind of figured out. So tell me a little bit first. When did you win Miss Washington, and how long was between Miss Washington and the Miss America pageant? Just give me kind of the background before going into that September.
Yes, yes. So I had the honor of being selected Miss Washington 2001 on July 4th weekend. Actually, I interviewed for Miss Washington on July 4th. And so I was selected as Miss Washington. That would have been just that first weekend then in July. And and we only had at that point in time just a couple of months to get ready before we hopped on the plane to head to Atlantic City, New Jersey, the birthplace of Miss America, and be able to experience all of that incredible nostalgia. Now, this was 23 years ago, and we were set to compete, I believe it was on the 21st or 22nd. And we arrived in Philadelphia first and had a wonderful time being hosted in Philadelphia. We got to stay at the Ritz-Carlton, which was like the schmanciest, fanciest hotel I'd ever stayed at. And then they eventually took us by train from Philadelphia down to Atlantic City, New Jersey, where we met the mayor of Atlantic City. I think the governor of New Jersey was there on hand to welcome us as well. And there was just a lot of fanfare and a lot of excitement about the Miss America pageant coming around again for its anniversary there in Atlantic City.
And following up with that, which you took my question right out of my mouth, was kind of what you guys were doing leading up to the pageant. Give me a little bit of a timeline. So,
Sure.
when did you arrive to Atlantic City, and when did the attacks happen? What was that timeline? How many days were you in New Jersey?
Yes, now I'm old, and this was 23 years ago, so I may not get this spot on, but we had only just arrived in Atlantic City. So I believe we arrived in Atlantic City on the afternoon of the 9th, and from the train station, we went directly to check-in. We signed in for our state on the big map, all of the festivities and that, and then that afternoon, we were released to be able to go back to our hotels and get changed and have a little bit of time out on the Atlantic City boardwalk. And so it used to be tradition that Miss America would go splash in the waves in the Atlantic City surf the morning after she was crowned Miss America. And so the other women who were sharing the same casino hotel that I was assigned to, where they had us all up and down the boardwalk in different hotels, and we were not assigned roommates back then. We had a traveling companion that we stayed with, and in my instance, my traveling companion's room was adjacent to mine. So our traveling companions and the women who were also staying at the same casino hotel as I was, we were at the Tropicana, went down to the boardwalk and did our jump in the surf, and it was so much fun, and kicked the water around, and we got our feet in the sand, and we're just like having that, wow, we're really here, we're really in Atlantic City, New Jersey, we're really contestants at the Miss America competition. It was so exciting. There was so much excitement in the air, and sort of this, just surreal, we're really here. Like I remember when I was in college, I had a picture of Atlantic City on foam core mounted, a big picture that Bev White gave to me, one of my mentors. deer pageant friend of the state of Washington, and I had put it up on my wall. And so when I finally made it there, it was like I'm looking at the place that was in this picture that I've been dreaming about and idealizing for so long, and now it's finally happening. So it was just really exciting. And then the next day, they put us through sort of our first day of rehearsals. That was on September 10th. And then it was the following morning, we had been assigned varying rehearsal schedules dependent upon what group we were in. So there were three groups, Mu, Alpha, Sigma, and each group was assigned to do something different. So two of the groups got to stay back in the hotel and sleep in that morning, and my group was the early group that was assigned to come into the theater and begin rehearsals.
So thinking about Miss America back then, and they've shortened the timeline of Miss America week. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, yours was 2 weeks, correct? Or normally during that
Yes.
time, it's about 2 weeks. So if you
14
only,
days. It was
it's
14
14
days
days.
from the time I got on the plane and left Seattle to the day that we were coming home from Atlantic City. We were back there for 14 days. Yeah.
So
But
before I
I
talk
have to say,
about,
part of the reason for that is rehearsals were so extensive. So we had
yeah,
Tony Danza, who had been on Broadway, who was just an exceptionally talented actor in many different ways. He brought in a live dance troupe with him, and then we were incorporated into that. And the production number that he and his troupe did that we were incorporated into was like 5 minutes long. It was like the second half opener for the pageant. It was ridiculously long. And, I mean, compared to today's standards, like whose
yeah,
attention span would, stay on the programming for that extent of time? But it was a really long production number. We were all in an opening production
yeah.
parade number, and then there was the second half opener, and then we had all of the production to learn for what we were doing for each of our walks and how we would be staged for onstage question. That year, they brought in the Miss America quiz, and so we had to see what the staging would be like that for the top five. They were put through
Mm.
a Jeopardy style like quiz show rather than just doing a final question. And then there was also, of course, all of the learning that we had to do about, if you make the top 15, if you make the top 10, if you make the top five, like this is what it's all going to look like. So, and then all of the B-roll that they had to take as well. So lots of photo shoots out and around the community there in Atlantic City and on the beach and on the boardwalk. So we were working on all of that on the 10th, and then digging into rehearsals on the 11th.
So that's crazy because you're only there on the 9th and 9/11 only happens 2 days later. And so you guys haven't probably even settled into the schedule, all the things that are supposed to be planned before the world kind of changes. So, tell me, from obviously you're really excited, you're doing those photo shoots, you're out in the community, you're doing extensive rehearsals, and then describe to me the exact moment when you found out about the towers and the attacks.
Yeah. So that was really crazy because literally we were in a dressing room that was in the basement of Boardwalk Hall, Historic Convention Hall in Atlantic City on the boardwalk. And again, there was 16 of us there. The rest of the young women had been assigned to stay back at their hotels that morning, I believe. And so they were not with us downstairs in the basement. And so we were just kind of in our convivial, we're all in our makeup and our hair and our chit chat and our, looking at wardrobe that needed to be steamed and hung or whatever. And the dressing room, I will tell you, this was tiny. So we're all,
Yeah.
everybody's packed in there. So to only have 16 of us in there, we were taking advantage of the time to be able to sort of spread ourselves out and figure out where our wardrobe was and all of that kind of stuff. And so we're, kind of getting ready. I think we were on a break from rehearsal at that point. And I saw a security guard who was female come into the dressing room, and she talked to one of the lead hostesses, and I just saw this exchange between the two of them and immediately knew something was wrong. And of course, the rest of the room maybe didn't see this. And so the chatter, is still going on, but I can see on our lead hostess's face, she's in charge of all the women who are there, in charge of the dressing room, and she's clearly upset about like something's wrong. And she quiets the ladies in the dressing room and she announces to us something's going on. It appears there has been a terrorist attack on America. And of course, we're all like, say what?
Yeah.
And so they kind of brought us all together and we're trying to figure this out. And somebody had brought a radio with them.
Mm.
Because in those days, right, we had either CD players
Yeah.
that were portable, but they were still full-size CD, or we had a radio, and somebody had brought a radio, and so we plugged it into the wall and tried to get a signal so that we could get some news about what was going on because, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have, television sets and down in the basement, and so we just really didn't know what was going on. And so the 16 of us sort of huddled around this radio trying to get some news and just listened to, and so I never initially saw any of the video, footage of what transpired that morning until actually I got home from Miss America. I only heard it on the radio, and I've never found radio to be quite so compelling, right? When you really need information, when you really need news, and that's the only access that you have. It was incredible to sit and just listen to what was transpiring, what was unfolding, but really the overall sense of confusion. Like, was this
Yeah.
was this just a plane crash? Or like there just wasn't enough information. And
Yeah.
so we're sitting there, well, then the second plane hit. And so
Hmm.
then now we know this is not just random. This is stuff, something's going down. And
Yeah.
around that, it was probably 30 minutes after that, they started bringing in all the rest of the women who'd been back at their home, and they were, crying, red-rimmed eyes, just very upset because they had seen it, right? We hadn't seen it yet. Um,
Hmm.
and so things just continue to sort of unfold, as information continued to come in, and we all just sat around this little black radio in the basement of Boardwalk Hall and listened as the events unfolded for the day. But I will never forget there was one pivotal moment that I think is just searing for all of us who were there, and that was when we heard an absolute, bone-chilling shriek from
Hmm.
Miss America's traveling companion, Marie, whose nephew had gone down as on Flight 93.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she didn't know, all of the things that that transpired later in the afternoon when that news came in, but just to feel the impact that she had, the knowledge that she had personally lost someone very special to her. Um,
Yeah.
and the grief, right, in that piercing shriek that just, and of course because people knew we were all waiting.
Yeah.
Miss Alaska had a brother who worked in Manhattan. Of course, Miss New York was there with us. There were just where we have representation from across the
Hmm.
country. And of course, people from around the world worked in the World Trade Centers. And New York is, filled with people who've come from all around the globe for employment and business and trade and all things. And so we had representation in the room for people who knew very personally stories of those who were living in the area around the World Trade Centers and just awaiting, when's the shoe gonna, when's the
Yeah.
drop. And of course, all of us were waiting for our families to get on airplanes to come and
Hmm.
at Miss America. And so,
Well, and I want to ask you about that. But to stick on the topic of just in that moment, in that day, um, you know, at at Boardwalk Hall or at the rehearsals, what did, and obviously you have your other title holders coming into the theater. They were back at the hotel. So in those first few hours into that first evening, what did the Miss America board and the staff, the choreographers, everyone helping to put this pageant on, what did they do to handle the situation not only on that first day, but also the rest of, those days to come when there was supposed to be a pageant happening?
right, right. So crisis decision making, right? What's the right thing to do? Will there be another attack? It's the Miss America pageant. I mean, it wasn't unreasonable to think that they would try to hit a sporting event or, something where there was a large grouping of people gathered, and here we are, getting ready to perform at a 10,000 seat theater. We're on the East Coast. These attacks have happened on the East Coast. How many other terror cells are there? If there are any, what else is coming, like we didn't know. And so there was a
Yeah.
lot of questioning, like, are we safe? Should we proceed with the event? Would it be disrespectful to hold a Miss America pageant telecast uh, in the wake of national grieving? Um,
Yeah.
all flights were grounded, right? So our families weren't coming then at that point in the next 3 days. All air traffic was grounded for 3 days. Nothing was airing on television. They canceled all major sporting events. So football was not happening in September. And so it was just really the nation was stunned and we were equally stunned. And I remember they brought in the reigning Miss America, Angela Presbaracchio, who's a former Miss Hawaii before she won Miss America. And she sat down with all of us, and she really resonated and just radiated the fear. Like you could just, she wanted to get back to her family. She wanted to get back to the people that she felt most safe and most close to. She wanted assurance that the people that she loved were okay. And she just wanted to go. She just wanted to leave. And there were many in the room who mirrored that same
Mm.
anxiety, that same, like, we got to get out of here. Like, how do we get out of here? Like, now we're stuck here. Like, there's no air travel. Nothing's happening. Are we safe? Like, it was just very chaotic and very
Almost, it
confusing.
kind of sounds like almost like a helplessness because you're not with your families, because you're not home. I mean, all these women you've probably only met maybe once or twice before. And yes, you're all title holders, but kind of strangers in a way too. And all the staff are strangers, and you're just kind of, all in one place stuck. It kind of sounds like, yeah, hopelessness.
Right, right. And, I mean, even how are they going to feed us, right?
Yeah,
These women stuck here for the next several days, I mean, it just like logistically, what are we going to do? And so it was a big undertaking for the organization to try and figure out what to do. And so ultimately, what the producers of the pageant did, it wasn't that same day, it was the following day, I believe. They gathered all of us in a large space upstairs in Convention Hall and posed to us the option of having the pageant or not having the pageant, which is pretty much unheard of. You're in television, so you know that you don't ask the producers don't ask the talent if they would
yeah,
like to perform or not.
yeah,
Right. And this is, I mean, there's millions of dollars behind this event, right? There's advertising dollars, there's airtime, there's, expense, there's all, and
yeah.
Helen is asking us, do you want to go on? Now the day before we had circled in prayer. And I have a beautiful photo of that, where we're all standing with the volunteers and the contestants, just holding hands and just praying over our nation, asking for wisdom. Like, what do we do? Praying for safety, praying for the families that have been affected, praying for the survivors that we knew those who were first responders were still trying to locate and care
Hmm.
for the first responders to have the courage and the stamina to be able to endure the work that was ahead of them as they began to sift through the rubble. It was just overwhelming, all of the things that we could have prayed about. But
Well, and then that day, did they go on with rehearsals, the
no,
day of?
no.
Yeah.
There was no way. Everyone was on
Okay.
pins and needles. Everyone was, I mean, everybody wondered, am I going to have a loved one who was on one of those planes? Am I
Hmm.
going to know someone? Is there someone that I know who works in the World Trade Center or who was at the World Trade Center? Was there somebody I know on Flight 93? Like, is there going to be another? Like, there was no way we were doing anything that day except sitting on pins and needles waiting for more information. Yeah,
Yeah.
he stopped.
And then going into what you were alluding to was just your state directors, your parents, families who were all trying to get to Miss America, or those even back home just trying to get a hold of you. Who did you
Yeah,
call
even for
first? Who
some
did
women,
you get in contact first?
I mean, well, and think about pageant, Regan, right? Some women were shipping costumes, wardrobe. Some people were bringing things to them still from their states. Like, we had this show me your shoes parade that was the
Mhm.
historic parade down the boardwalk, and the costumes were huge, and the shoes were crazy, and it
Yeah.
was all of those things. They were still coming, like they hadn't gotten there yet, and now everything's just stopped. And so in terms of who do you call first, at that point, we weren't calling anybody because we were
Mhm.
sequestered.
Yeah.
So you couldn't. I mean, we only had, and that's why my class really galvanized as a sisterhood. I mean, obviously, when you
Yeah.
go through something traumatic like that, we all wanted to call home. We all wanted to know that we were going to be okay, and we couldn't. We couldn't. We had no assurances other than, And we wrote a book together. I have a copy of it here. It's called Under the Crown. And Katie Harmon, our Miss America, who was selected that year, is on the front, which, spoiler alert, we did go forward with the pageant. But we each wrote about what that experience meant for us going through that time. And we all had the chance to submit something. And so this was when the Chicken Soup for the Soul books were really popular. And so that kind
Mhm.
of is how this reads. But mine specifically is called The Power of the Human Touch. And for
Mhm.
me, because we couldn't get on the phone or FaceTime or anything to try and connect with our people, we only could hold each other's hands. We could only wrap an arm around a sister. We could only hug each other. We only had our traveling companions and our Atlantic City hostesses. And so the power of that human touch and knowing that the reassurance that came from that and the humanity that came from that when you do feel so helpless was so powerful, so
Mhm.
to just be like, I'm okay, at least for right now, I'm okay, and I'm going to be
Mhm.
okay.
I'm
And
sure you all created a bond that surprised you because you thought this never would have happened, but it was so
this
needed
was
in that moment.
inconceivable, just like today, right? It's
Yeah.
inconceivable that something like this could happen. Our nation had not been attacked by terrorists or any act of war really since in this magnitude since Pearl Harbor. And
Hmm.
so we couldn't explain it to someone couldn't explain it to us, and even today it's hard for me to explain it to you, so that you can understand the full weight of what the experience was like and how it galvanized our nation. And we saw things in each other from a humanities standpoint as well as from a national pride standpoint that just was astounding. I mean,
Yeah.
it was
And
really,
in talking about both the day and the days after, I just thinking about geography, you know, you were in Atlantic City,
yeah.
not far from New York City. So how, obviously this situation is so serious for the entire world, but because you were all so close, how was that severity heightened even more, because you were not far?
Yeah, well, security increased tenfold.
Yeah.
Obviously. And yes, I mean, we had just been in Philadelphia. They flew us into Philadelphia. We'd run the Rocky Steps as part of our B-roll. I mean, we'd
Wow.
been there. We saw
Yeah.
the Liberty Bell, all the things, and that's where Flight 93 went down.
Mhm.
And that's the famous "Let's roll." Todd
Yeah.
Beamer said that. This is the last words to his wife. We're going to do this. We're not going to let this plane affect another landmark. They had enough information aboard the flight to know that something was up. This plane had been hijacked and it was going to cause mass casualties. So either their lives could be sacrificed or many lives would be sacrificed. And those were the last words that Todd said to his wife were, let's roll. He was, gathered a group of
Wow.
people and we're going to go. We're going to storm the cockpit and we're going to make the difference to take this plane down. And they were successful in that. So we had just been in Philadelphia where I mean, they accomplished that feat, in the
Yeah.
area where we had just been. So yes, it definitely heightened our awareness of our vulnerability and not knowing if there would be another attack on the East Coast or where it would be. And they moved the historic Show Me Your Shoes parade inside. And so
Wow.
this small space that was actually a very, very small, like almost commons size, like at a typical high school today, commons size with a small stage at the front room. They put tables out in the middle and they brought the girls in one door and took them around the square room on a rolling cart, and then the next girl came in. It was
Wow.
a little train of the Show Me Your Shoes parade around this commons like room. And it was just at least we got to have it, which was
Yes.
a gift. But yeah, they just didn't know if because the parade was so big in Atlantic
Hmm.
City and people lined up and down the boardwalk, and because of the fear of the threat, not knowing, they just thought that the city just said for the safety of the public and the contestants and everything, we are not doing this. So they
Wow.
brought us in, I think they had maybe three or four rolling carts and they just wheeled us around the room.
Oh
And
my gosh, I had no
it was
idea.
it was disappointing,
I'm
right? But
sure.
at that point we had no expectations.
Yeah.
We were just grateful. We were just
And
grateful.
was it just like families? I mean, you're describing a small space instead of
Oh
the
my
public.
goodness. So, if you think about visitation at Miss America,
Uh-huh.
for those who know, it would have been the same crowd that would have
Yeah.
shown up for a visitation. And of course it was a bit smaller because those who were there were the brave souls who had postured whether or not they should even get on an airplane, right?
Yeah.
Most of them had to fly to get there. And I
Yeah.
will never forget my local director for Miss Pierce County, Charlie Curry Van Tramp, who later became our state director. Her daughters, she had two daughters who were close in age to me, and they were weeping, begging her not to get on the airplane,
Wow.
just not knowing that they
Yeah.
could potentially lose their mom to go to the
Yeah.
Miss America pageant. And she was like,
Yeah.
be there. I have to be there to support Breann.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I guess I skipped ahead a little bit in the story because I was telling you about how the producers had asked us if we wanted to go on. And the way that that decision was made was actually by democratic voting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. And so we each had an opportunity to make our case. Katie Harmon, our Miss America, actually has an incredible photo of that. And then I think it was Miss Iowa who was selected to count up the votes after we had deliberations, literally,
Uh-huh.
with us. Were able to state how we felt, why we felt the way we did. And I'll just tell you, Regan, I was particularly impassioned about my desire to go forward
Yeah.
with the Miss America competition. And the reason that I felt that way is because I felt that the nation needed something to lift their spirits,
Uh-huh.
to give them a sense of hope, a sense of normalcy, something to cheer for. And to see, I mean, the Miss America, it's the Super Bowl for women at that time
Yeah.
anyway. Now, women have so many different ways that they're empowered and can achieve. But at that time, 23 years ago, like it was our Super Bowl. It was a big deal to be a contestant on the Miss America stage. And here we are with this opportunity to really lift the spirits of the nation if the producers could play it off properly, respectfully,
Yeah.
and with the right tone. And they did.
Uh-huh.
They did. And it was beautiful. It's on YouTube if you want to go back and find the footage. Tony Danza was the MC. He opened with a prayer, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was, I mean, I brought my tissues because I figured I'd cry.
Yeah. I
But
can
I begin
imagine.
to get emotional just thinking about how the nation was reverenced
Yeah.
and the national grief was uh, tended to carefully through the event. It was just so beautifully done. And Katie Harmon will tell a story. She was selected Miss America that night of our competition, our final competition, and she was immediately practically shipped off to ground zero to make an
Yeah.
appearance for the sake of the nation, right?
Very
And she
cool.
was approached by two first responders who were just exhausted. She was down
Hmm.
there, they were on a coffee break, and she was serving coffee to them.
Hmm.
And they came to her and they said specifically, I watched the pageant last night. I watched you win. And she said, oh, not really quite sure what to say. And he said,
Yeah.
so glad, one of the guys said, I'm so glad you did it. I'm so glad you did it. I needed that. We needed that. Our nation needed that. And I'm
Hmm.
so pleased to sit down. My wife told me I had to sit down and watch, and I'm so glad I did. Thank you.
Wow. That's so powerful.
Showing up for a pageant,
Yeah.
right? It was really powerful. It was really powerful. It meant a lot to people because nothing was being telecast. We were the first nationally telecast live event to transpire since September 11th occurred.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And seeing your passion here and your sympathy, I want to know how you felt, you know, the curtain's about to go up, the lights are about to go on, you're about to step on to the Miss America stage for night one. Tell me that feeling and really describe to me that feeling of, okay, the show is about to start all the way till the end of the show. I want to know what the emotions were of both you and all the women as the pageant started to when Katie was crowned.
Hmm. Well, I can tell you they had already done their due diligence in allowing us a couple of opportunities outside of competition to engage in some we had a candlelight vigil at one point at the Ocean One Mall there in Atlantic City, which was lovely to be able to have that moment. And so they had given us an opportunity to sort of collectively grieve and also be out in the community, collectively grieving with the community, which was also a gift.
Mhm.
So by the time we got to competition, of course, another week had passed, and so now we're feeling, of course, all of the excitement of competing at the Miss America pageant and for the title of Miss America, but we had actually passed the crown around prior to the first night of competition. Each of us was given an opportunity to hold it, and
Wow.
was given an opportunity to do whatever really we felt led to do. So for some of us, that was to pray over it, to bless it, to give good vibes to it, to wish over it, because we knew at that point that the young woman who stepped under that crown and under that responsibility for that
Hmm.
year would be an icon for
Yeah.
the nation, much like a Princess Diana, right?
Yeah.
A real dynamic, attractive individual for all the things that our country needed
Yeah.
in that moment to really rally around a symbol. And she was. And so that all of that had happened before. And so by the time we got to Curtin, we're all backstage, we're all waiting. That year they had us all in white gowns for the opening production number.
Hmm.
And then the back of the stage was they decided to put the American flag
Hmm.
on the lighting on the very back of screen of the stage. And so you had all of these women in white. And now the color of the women's movement, right? Also white.
Mm.
And
And
so
then the
they had
flag.
this parade into the audience,
Yeah,
introduce ourselves on pods that were located on either side of the runway, and then we stepped onto the runway and made our way onto the stage
very
itself.
cool.
So you had all of these white gowns and the American flag at the back of the stage, and when
Wow.
we came out, the audience just roared. I mean,
Oh, I'm sure.
it's a 10,000 seat venue. They just went wild.
Yeah,
As we walked through, I mean, they had the beautiful, American like thing. It looked like the 4th of July, right? Because as Americans,
yeah.
that's when we really bust out all the red, white, and blue. And there was so much red, white, and blue flags, little flags
Oh,
everywhere, big American flags being held up. It
yeah.
was just pendants out. I mean, it was just the place was strung with red, white, and blue everywhere, and it was so
Hmm.
powerful. It was so
Oh my
powerful
gosh.
to be part of that. Yeah.
So no, you're making me cry too. I can't even fathom the energy I'm sure, that theater had that night.
Yeah.
Uh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so
And
that's night one, right? And then you've got night
yeah.
and then night three. So there were consecutive nights of competition culminating with final night. And so of course each night the theater gets a little bit more full with supporters and people
Hmm.
who are coming. And some years the organization doesn't sell enough tickets, so they open it up to folks from the community to come in and be able to sit up in the nosebleeds
Hmm.
at a cheaper rate. And so the house was full.
Yeah.
Final night, it was the Miss America pageant. Nothing else was happening, and it was a full house
Wow.
for that final night. And so again, just the crowd noise and the enthusiasm for what was transpiring and for what Miss America meant that year for the United States. It was huge. It was huge. And then the telecast itself was just so well done. And I would encourage anyone who had a few extra minutes, if you love pageant, to go back and
Hmm.
watch Miss America. It would have been the Miss America 2002 competition. We were there in September of 2001, crowning Miss America
For
2002.
2002.
Mm-hmm.
So something I wanted to ask is obviously pageant is a competition, and with your emotions just now, Breann, I can feel the power of the crowd and the girls all rallying together, like you said, to be the first major event the country had since the attacks. How did the judges and the competition itself shift the attitude, following 9/11 into the pageant? Because I'm sure whatever those judges planned on doing, prior to the attacks, I'm sure that changed. And being a pageant member myself, you're competitive. You want to win, you're competitive. That's just your natural state of who you are when you're at that high level of a national, event like a Miss America pageant. And so how did, the attitude of girls, the competition, the judges change with this major event happening, right before the pageant? Did they change their questions? Did they change their attitudes in the judges interview? How was the Jeopardy, when the finalists were on stage? How did that all shift?
Right, right. Well, I will say that in personal interview, I do think that there was a somberness uh,
Hmm.
from the judges panel that maybe would not be the same for a typical Miss America interview or competition. And we were all feeling the somberness as
Yeah.
well. And so there was just sort of a blanket of grief that was still present. And so I would say that while the interview questions were tough and challenging, I would say that maybe they were even an edge up beyond what they normally would be, because
Yeah.
again, we all knew that whoever was selected as the next Miss America would be facing a lot of press.
Yeah.
And sometimes the press can be really tough. And so I think the goal of the judges was to ensure that, ladies, we know you've been through it and we've all been through it as a nation, but we have to really check to see that you're ready, whoever we
Hmm.
select, to say the hard things, to endure the hard questions, and to make that stand. That because you will be pressed by the media. And so I
Yeah.
think they just were they offered a little bit more of an edge in their questions, and I think they pushed a little bit harder. And then again, just that sense of like the weightiness of the
Yeah.
year. With regard to the contestants, I will say that the only thing that shifted was we ended up sort of with a sense of there being sort of camps. So the women who we had a majority that voted to hold the pageant, but then we did have a handful of women who were opposed and did not feel that it was appropriate to move forward with the competition. Just in the wake of national grieving, that it just wasn't the right
Yeah.
thing to do, or they just really wanted to not participate. They just were out. They were out of it. They were just I don't want to participate. Like I'm
Yeah.
grieving. This is not the time for me to be competing in a pageant. Like it's just
Yeah.
ill-timed given what we're experiencing. Um, and so there was a little bit of tension as a result of that in the dressing room.
Yeah.
There was sort of two camps then. But not that that wasn't overcome by the overall appreciation for still wanting to really back the woman that the judges chose, knowing
Yeah.
that she was not just our representative, but the nation's representative in a much bigger way than typically would be the case.
No, going back to kind of the judges, I would have thought differently. I would have thought maybe everyone was easier and everyone was a little bit, but that makes total sense. They need someone that can handle what the rest of this year and what the country's changes, they're going to be the forefront of it.
Yeah.
So that totally makes sense. Which kind of brings me to your year of service. Obviously, you had just won Miss America during or Miss Washington 4th of July weekend, went into Miss America 2 months later. And then you had the rest of your year. You had about what, 9 months to serve.
Mm.
And so after the pageant, you're coming home. There's always a lull after the pageant where you're just resting, trying to
Yes,
figure out your life of what
yes,
post Miss America pageant is, as
yes.
every title holder goes through. How did 9/11 change the rest of your year of service as you served Washington State?
Mm. It really gave me a different heart for people,
Mhm.
just a completely different heart. I think that I felt much more of a servant's heart as a
Mhm.
result of what transpired on 9/11 because of understanding who we were selecting as Miss America. And when you go compete at Miss America, you elevate your own game as a
Yeah.
contestant because the caliber of women is so high. And so
Mhm.
even though many of, there's only one who gets to wear the crown,
Yeah.
some didn't want to be Miss America. Many of us would have loved to have assumed that responsibility for the year.
Yeah.
And so I believe that heart comes home with us
Yeah.
competition. And so while, I think maybe after having won Miss Washington, I would have felt very much like, oh, I get to be a pseudo celebrity for the year. And this is, I'm going to go promote the Miss Washington organization. I'm going to make contacts and network and, show up at events and do ribbon cutting
Mhm.
and do philanthropic work with my service initiative and all of those wonderful things that are part of the important pageant work that these empowered women do. That was not my same heart when I came home from
Yeah.
Miss America. I definitely felt more of a heart for people, wanted to do more to serve people, and wanted to eagerly said yes to any event, whether they could pay me or not pay me for my participation. There's Miss Washington does charge a small fee for appearances, and I just said
Mhm.
yes to everything because I just knew that we needed that kind of energy out in
Yeah.
our communities, given the way that our nation was still grieving and given the solidarity and the resilience that then we were seeing from the American public, and we were sending our troops, right? So by
Yeah.
October, we were launched in a mission. We were at war, and
Yeah.
it really felt like coming under the crown for that season. It was
Yeah.
important to be out serving in my community and in the greater state of Washington.
And you're obviously, like you said, you're a servant leader. You had a heart for people. And as Miss Washington, you're also a leader for all the local title holders who are competing that year, all those candidates that, eventually want to be Miss Washington and are looking forward to competition the next July. And so I didn't have this question written down, but now that you're speaking about it, how was your experience leading that next group of candidates, and you're at events with them, you're helping them get crowned as they win their own local titles? What was that experience as they looked up to you when you had that experience, in Atlantic City?
Mhm. So I think for my year now, again, Regan, this is 23 years ago. So we did not have a Facebook group as all the,
Mhm.
locals were being crowned and selected.
Yeah,
We did not have a bunch of Zoom calls in advance where we could kind of give some prep to some of the women as they were getting ready for competition. We didn't have a teen program at
yeah,
that time. So the landscape looked a little different.
yeah,
It was email, and maybe if you had a cell phone, you could get in touch. So really showing up to the locals, I was sort of an enigma. Like people
Mhm.
didn't really know me. And so again, for me, because we didn't have all these ways for folks to get to know, there wasn't a live stream where you could watch every local competition from home.
Yeah,
You had to get in the car and you had to go. Well, if live in Clark County, maybe getting to Tri-Cities isn't an option for you, right? To
yeah,
go and see every young woman crowned. And pageant tickets are expensive when you start adding them up that way. So, really showing up and being this pseudo celebrity that none of these women have encountered before, it was very
yeah.
much like for me arriving to Atlantic City and being
Mhm.
put into this environment where I didn't know anybody. My family wasn't there with me. And so, really needing to come out of my shell
Yeah,
and instead of being focused on, well, I don't know anybody, but my responsibility, I felt, was to put them at ease,
yeah,
to let them know how amazing they were, to
yeah,
invite them to, if this year it doesn't work out for you, come back and compete again. To let them know about all of the scholarship opportunities that are available through the Miss America organization, many, many thousands of dollars. You don't even have to win the title to access that money. Just
hmm
lots of ways to participate. And I just wanted really to make the women that I was encountering at the local, as well as the volunteers,
hmm
feel like they had had an opportunity to access not just Miss Washington, but someone who had graced the Miss America stage, like who'd had that opportunity. And I just wanted it to feel like it was really special for them, that I made them feel special in some way. So again, just kind of transitioning from that, oh, I'm a pseudo celebrity, to
hmm
instead becoming very real, just really
Yeah.
want to be very real and really connect with people.
Um, you continued pageantry, after Miss America, um, and you competed in the Miss USA system. So my question kind of with that shift of the world changed obviously after 9/11, and it's we're still seeing the repercussions of that even today. Did 9/11 have a longer lasting impact on the world of pageantry? Obviously, you went to the Miss USA competition not too long after.
Yeah.
How did, was there any major impact or just shifts that you saw in the pageantry world because of it?
Hmm. Um, you know, I guess I'll say two things about that. So first of all, I don't know very many people who realize this, but I was at Miss America in 2001 and I was at in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I was competing at Miss USA in San Antonio, Texas in 2003 in
Hmm
March. And that time frame that we were in San Antonio competing for Miss USA was during our rehearsal weeks. The United States of America engaged in what was referred to as a shock and awe military event bombing Iraq.
Wow.
So I'm at a national pageant, and either we're getting attacked or we're attacking somebody. It was just a really unsafe feeling period of time.
Yeah.
The world today feels very much at unrest, not at rest, like it feels very unsafe and just the geopolitical climate is very, questionable. But in that moment, we were under attack in 2001. And then here it is, March of 2003. And now we are still, not only have we been attacking, we are still attacking. We are still engaged in war. And
Yeah.
even, 20 years later, we're still impacting that region with our military. So, still learning, right? Still learning. How
Yeah.
how do we handle, how do we create policy, how do we, respond militarily to crisis events?
Hmm.
We're still learning. We're still
Yeah.
assess and address that. So I think what's important though, if you were asking about Miss USA and if 9/11 changed the climate, and I would just say 9/11 changed the climate for all of us, right? I went to Miss
Yeah.
USA and I went through a TSA check that I did not have when I went to Miss America
Yeah.
because it changed the landscape of our nation so greatly from the policies that we make and the rules that we now follow. And there was a whole new entity called Homeland Security that didn't exist before 9/11, right? That was created.
Wow.
It didn't just have an impact on pageant. Yeah, it had an impact on everything. So, try traveling with to go to a national pageant with little modeling, so there are lots of
Hmm.
things being shipped and this much self tanner is not going to get me through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like things like that and just, being checked for those kinds of things. Actually, funny story, I'll tell really quick. I remember being Miss Washington and they had instituted security checks. I was in Pullman, Washington for an
Mhm.
appearance event, and I was flying from the Pullman airport back to SeaTac, and I had a pair of cuticle scissors in my bag, and I was terribly humiliated and embarrassed when I went through the security line and my carry-on bag was searched as
Yeah.
Washington, and the agent pulls out these cuticle scissors and was furious that I would be traveling with these because this is literally just weeks, months after.
After.
And it didn't even occur to me, right? Just
Yeah.
it was just so embarrassed and he was so upset. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, Miss
And
Moore.
you're young, you're
Yeah.
young and still impressionable, and you just aim to please,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Needless to say, I never travel with cuticle scissors now.
I'm sure I would
Yeah,
be
those
scarred for
kinds of
life.
things just changed the landscape dramatically. But I
Wow.
will say that going to Miss USA after having this really weighty experience at Miss America, going to Miss USA was just fun.
Yeah. I was
Fun.
gonna say, did it
So
just feel
fun.
like, okay, like no major events are happening? I mean, yes, there's a war happening. However, you
Not
can
on our
just,
soil,
yeah,
not
you
in
can just,
America. Yep, we're sending our military, God bless
yeah,
them, and keep them. But they are fighting on our behalf so that the American citizenry is not as impacted in the same way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And you guys can enjoy, actually competing. And I mean, I don't want to say at all this is a do-over because that's not what that is. But I would say you kind of got that second chance experience
Yeah.
where there wasn't this major attack happening.
Right.
And
Right.
that's kind of cool because you were someone that went and competed at another, the second most known pageant, in the country. And you got to have that other experience. And so you have those dueling experiences. So I think that is actually very cool that you have that in your heart and in your memories.
And
And to compare the
there were
two.
several of us that year who were former Miss America contestants who had crossed over to USA. In fact, Nicole O'Brien, Nikki Lassiter,
Hmm.
Texas, who makes the Nikki Lassiter bags. She was a contestant that year at Miss USA.
Wow.
Also former Miss America contestant. And then Beth Hood from Tennessee, who was in the top five. And let's see, South Dakota, Jessica from South Dakota. So yeah, there were several of us that year
Yeah.
who were at Miss USA who had been on the Miss America stage previously, not all in 2001, but who'd been on the Miss America stage previously. So that was really fun to have like Miss America girls with me
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. And you guys have that same kind of experience. You relate to each other in a different way. And so you're
Yes,
taking that on into
yes,
competition, which is
yes.
cool.
Sisterhood is very strong and has always been strong in the Miss America organization because of local competitions, because of
Mhm.
mentorship, because of alumni groups. It has and the longer history, I think. The
Yeah.
Miss USA organization does not have that same level of sisterhood, especially not in the state of Washington or the alumni identity. And so when you go to the USA system, it just feels a little bit different than competing in the America system, and also attracts completely different type of women
Mhm.
who have different goals than the women who compete in the America system. So I want to point out that they're two very different entities, very different organizations.
Yeah.
That's right for a young woman, but that's not what we're here to talk. I
Well,
can promote pageant anytime, anywhere.
yes, you could. Well, Breann, those are all my questions I wanted to round out. And so I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything from your side. Anything else important that you want to make note of that experience 23 years ago?
Yeah. So there were a few thoughts that I had this morning. I just made a couple of notes about things that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted to
Um,
contextualize what transpired for our nation on September 11th. Not just my story, but really our nation's story. And just so for younger people who, I love mentoring and coaching and helping young women who are coming up through pageantry. And I realize that trying to understand what happened and what it meant for our nation is difficult today to get a good grip on it. And so I really wanted to just highlight a few things. So, first of all, I wanted to point out that it only required 19 individuals who were terrorists, part of the Al Qaeda group, to come and cause complete disruption and murder 3,000 American
yeah.
citizens. And so when we talk about terrorism today, I think it's really important to point out that people who exact terror are trying to produce a fear response.
Yeah.
They are completely unreasonable in their thinking. They don't want to be reasoned with. Uh,
Yeah.
and so these 19 individuals had a radicalized thought about America and about American citizens. And so the result of that was the willingness to cause mass casualty. Even they would have
Hmm.
taken more than 3,000 lives if they could have. But fortunately, they were not able to. But I want to point out the that it only took a handful of individuals to cause incredible chaos, disruption,
Hmm.
for our nation, and
And for years to come.
yeah, and for years, and it changed the landscape of our nation. I also just wanted to say that I really think that young people on the anniversary of September 11th should pause, not to just listen to a few, news reports, but really, if you have a curiosity at any level or an interest, to learn about it, to read
Yeah.
about it, to listen to people's personal stories about that day and how it affected them, to vivify it for you so that you have a sense of more of a connection with what it was like. I think that's important. And a second point that I wanted to make was that I think it's also important to observe how it did transform and change our nation, which we've already talked about as part of the conversation. But really, the thing that was most incredible for me, and I have this amazing coffee table book that was gifted to me at the end of my year of service as Miss Washington in June of 2002. My former director gave this to me, Charlie Van Trail.
Wow.
And you can see the Twin Towers there in the front photo. But this is what America was doing
Yeah.
after 9/11. And this is a book that Time put out after the attacks. If you can find a copy of it, it's really compelling. Beautiful images and wonderful storytelling about the timeline with pictures, with victim stories, with family stories, images of what Manhattan looked like in the wake of the aftermath. And to understand that in New York, it wasn't just the Twin Towers that were affected. Like this was massive affect on the city,
Hmm.
multiple buildings around the Twin Towers also affected. I mean, just the magnitude
Yeah.
is unfathomable. So really to just understand how it transformed not only the New York skyline, but how it transformed our nation. Um, and I know that our intelligence agencies really are still striving to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But something that as Americans, because of the way that people think about us in some parts of the world, is certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
But just feeling, that just feeling that, just being aware of that.
Yeah.
Um, and then finally, I just wrote, feel that, feel it. You know, it was unimaginable at the time, and today it's sort of unimaginable again that that you would just wake up one morning and your world would be completely changed, that there would be this
Hmm.
effect. You know, you can't fly anywhere. There's been a major mass casualties of the civilianry of the nation. You could be next. Your family could be affected. Like, just feel it.
Yeah.
The chaos, the fear, and the collective grief and anguish that that would cause even today. And so just the raw emotion then that affected us as a nation and the fear and the threat that we just didn't fully understand. And today we
Hmm.
understand terrorism, I don't think, in the US. And then how, you know, the policy responses occurred. And there was just a lot of urgent
Yeah.
crisis decision making. And sometimes, you know, in that raw emotion, the best decisions don't get made. And so as we look back on that, we don't want to look back with a pointed finger and go, oh, how can they do something so foolish? Or, you know, that wasn't very well thought out. Or why did we go to Afghanistan? You know, why were we bombing Iraq? You know, like what, you know, why did we do all these things? And so, you know, we did the best we knew how to do at the time. And crisis decision making is a tough place to be in. And we're all still human, right?
Yeah.
As we look back at history, our goal is to not repeat it. And if we're faced with it again, to do it better than our predecessors. And so that's why I think that understanding 9/11 is so important. And so I just encourage you to watch clips and see the reality of it
Yeah.
and try to understand it the best that you can so that you can be part of the national fabric that works to keep our nation safe and secure and free from threat and from ideologies that might threaten, you know, who we are as a democracy and as a people. Well, and let's not forget that the beautiful image of our own Miss America 2002, Katie Harmon, showing up at Ground Zero to serve the workers coffee
Yeah.
who had been on their feet for more than 24 hours, you know, working shifts around the clock, exhausted, breathing in the dust that was still hanging in the air, searching for people who might be surviving. She did not show up to sign autographs.
Exactly. Exactly. And I
Neat.
think,
She signed a few hard hats. I do know that. But she
yeah.
did not show up with to be a celebrity. She showed up to be a servant. And
Yeah.
that image to me just is the culmination of everything of what we should be seeking to be when we step under the crown.
Exactly, exactly. And I think seeking out those opportunities in smaller spaces, you know, where we see needs in our communities is still really important. So I love that you touched on that.
Yeah.
Well, Breann, I think we did a great job. That was so moving, and I'm glad I was the one to be able to talk to you about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Regan. And as we look at the anniversary of September 11th, I just want to say, United we stand. That was the mantra at that time. And I hope that for the United States, that if we ever encounter that kind of casualty and loss again at the hands of terrorists, that we will once again rally together and be united, that united we would stand. And then we also say today, never forget. And so just in the retelling of these stories and, you know, looking at the pictures, we can help continue to honor the memories of the individuals who did not make it out and who gave up their lives because they were Americans. It's simply going to work,
Yeah,
just going to work.
yeah,
And so we just honor them on September
yeah,
as well. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate you
yeah.
speaking with me about this.